Hi, good evening, everybody, and welcome to tonight's discussion about the rental registry and energy disclosure ordinance. We're just going to give everybody a couple minutes to join. So we'll start around 6:02, 6:03. Thank you so much again. Great. Welcome, everybody. My name is Christine Blaze. I'm the director of Mayor Ballantyne's Office of Sustainability and Environment, and I'm honored and delighted that so many of you have joined us this evening. I'd like to introduce staff joining us from the city tonight. We have Garrett Anderson, who is our Residential Decarbonization Program Manager, along with Naomi Gross, who's our Community Engagement Specialist. Next slide, please. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to discuss the proposed rental registry and energy disclosure ordinance. This is another step in a 6-month engagement process where the city has engaged stakeholders and the community, and it is not the last opportunity for engagement either. The goal tonight is to share what the ordinance is, why we're proposing it, takeaways from engagement that's been completed so far, and another opportunity to hear from you. What's even more exciting is that a lot of the attendees that are here tonight did not participate in previous engagement efforts, so we're excited to hear from you this evening. We're also joined by the Consensus Building Institute, a nonprofit organization that's based in Cambridge with decades of experience helping leaders collaborate and solve complex issues, and they'll be leading the meeting this evening. So with that, I'll turn it over to Toby Berkman, the senior mediator at CBI, to introduce his team and go through some table setting for this evening. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much for that lovely introduction, Christine. So hi, everyone. My name is Toby Berkman. As Christine mentioned, I'm a senior mediator at the Consensus Building Institute, or CBI. We're a nonprofit that's based out of Cambridge, and we do facilitation, stakeholder engagement on public policy issues. And we were brought in by the city to help with stakeholder engagement on this rental registry and energy disclosure ordinance. Later on in today's meeting, we're going to share a little bit more about what we did and what we found so far through that stakeholder engagement. I'm going to be facilitating today's discussion, so helping manage the participants, give you an opportunity to share your thoughts, help make sure you understand what's going to be happening and how. So on that note, here is our agenda for this evening. We're doing some welcoming remarks right now, but in just a couple minutes, we're going to turn it back to our colleagues from the city, who are going to give a little more background on this rental registry and energy disclosure proposed ordinance, what it is, how it came about. We'll have just a couple minutes for some brief Q&A on that, and then we at CBI will share a little bit about what we found through our engagement findings so far, what we learned from folks like you all in terms of your reactions to the proposed ordinance. We'll share about the activities we did to get that feedback. And again, we'll then have just a couple of minutes for clarifying questions. And then we expect at around 7 o'clock, we're actually going to do some breakout conversations. We're going to send folks out to small groups. We want to do that to just enable more feedback, to hear from more of you than we would otherwise be able to in this meeting. So we hope to have about 20 minutes in those conversations and hear from as many of you as we can in that time. We'll come back, we'll share a little bit from each breakout conversation about what folks heard, and then we will adjourn the meeting. I'll just say we are recording this session. We are also taking notes, and we'll be developing a summary to make sure that all the ideas that are heard here today are captured and included in the thinking that the city is going to be doing about this ordinance moving forward. Before I say anything else, I just also want to introduce my team members. So we have my colleague Abby Fulham here, also from CBI, and my colleague Annika Raynar, who's joining from CBI as well, and they'll be helping in various portions of the meeting, including in the breakout conversations. Okay, so before we go any further, I just want to say a little bit about the logistics of today's meeting. When we are doing things in this main room, so specifically after the presentations that we're going to be providing in just a minute, we are going to have an opportunity for clarifying questions. So you should see in your Zoom toolbar a little button there that you can use to raise your hand. So when we get to that portion of the meeting, you'll be able to raise your hand using that button, and then we'll prompt you by indicating that we're going to call on you. And then you'll see a little message that says that you can unmute and speak. And at that point, you can unmute yourself and speak and offer your question or whatever it might be in that moment. When we go to breakout groups, it's actually going to be a little bit easier. We'll all kind of be able to see each other's faces and unmute for longer under your own control. But in the large group, that's how it's going to work. So before we go further, we just like to get a little bit of a sense of who is here in the room. So we're launching a poll right here, and we'd love for you all to answer the handful of questions that you should see appearing on your screen there. We're asking if you are someone who participated in a focus group conversation before this evening. And then also, which sector are you from? Are you a tenant? Are you a landlord? Are you a professional services provider like a realtor or a climate organization representative, or none of the above, right? Something else. So great. I see the vast majority of people have answered, which is excellent. If you're one of those handful that has in, go ahead. We're going to close the poll in 3, 2, 1, and let's go ahead and show the results here. So, okay, interesting. So we have 7 folks here. So 18% of the room was in a focus group conversation. So great, welcome back. Wonderful to have you here and have a chance to hear from you again. But also excellent, we have a lot of people who weren't. So new voices that we're bringing in to get additional feedback from. Thank you for joining. We're really glad you're here and look forward to hearing from you. In terms of who's in the room, we have a couple of tenants. We have a good number of landlords. So over half the people in the room are landlords. So great, welcome. And then a handful of professional service providers, climate organization representatives, and others. Okay, great. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it back to Christine, who's going to kick us off with a presentation here about the ordinance, what it is, and how it came about. So over to you, Christine.
Thanks so much, Toby. So first, we're going to talk about the Rental Registry and Energy Disclosure Ordinance. What is it and how did it come about? Next slide, please. So the Rental Registry and Energy Disclosure Ordinance, or that I might abbreviate as RED, is made up of 2 components. The first part is the rental registry. Through the registry, property owners would register rental units annually, providing a local point of contact and some general information about the rental units that are located in Somerville. The second piece is the energy disclosure, and through the disclosure, property owners would disclose information about rental units. Information would be provided to prospective tenants at or before the time of lease. So that is what the ordinance is, but I also wanted to take an opportunity to say what the ordinance is not. So the ordinance would not create a proactive inspection program, nor any energy standards. It's also not rent control. Next slide. So why is this important? The Rental Registry and Energy Disclosure Ordinance is intended to increase awareness and education about the rental market as well as energy efficiency. We hope that the registry, coupled with the disclosure, provides landlords, tenants, and I should say property owners, tenants, and municipal staff with information to make more informed decisions and create a path for the city to share information about programs and services that many may not know about. It will also help the city city and the community at large meet goals on health, housing, energy, and climate while informing policy and incentive programs. According to the Rocky Mountain Institute, rental registries are in place in about 60% of US cities, including cities with a similar makeup to Somerville. And from what I've seen, some of these can be as low as with 40% of their population renting. And in Somerville, we're about 2/3 of our housing stock being renters. While the energy disclosure may be newer to Massachusetts, the state of Maine has an energy disclosure requirement that's in place statewide. And many cities across the country also have energy disclosures in place. Next slide. Energy efficiency measures are encouraged by this ordinance and can improve environmental health. So we're the first area that we're going to talk about is health and how it can benefit from this policy. So for example, the cost of weatherization, such as insulation and air sealing, is 100% covered by Mass Save for rental properties. Weatherization has been shown to improve indoor air quality by reducing pollutants. It can also reduce noise, improve heating and cooling system efficiencies and costs, even reducing bills by up to 40%, and improve the lifespan of heating and cooling systems, as well as improving residents' comfort. So despite program offerings and co-benefits, in-house reporting has shown that tenants are reporting a lack of weatherization in their units, and they fear bringing it up. So we feel that improving knowledge and awareness of energy efficiency can improve understanding of buildings and how it operates, along with what incentives are available to improve it. Other cities with energy disclosures have shown that it can encourage property owners to make improvements as well. Next slide. The transparency offered by an energy disclosure may encourage property owners to offer more comfortable, energy efficient units, and this can lead to tenants staying in units longer, as well as improve the longevity of building systems, reducing costs and maintenance costs over time. These outcomes can lead to higher performance of the systems themselves, as well as decreased costs that property owners may incur through advertising a unit once it becomes vacant, having the unit actually sit on the market vacant, even if it's just for a month, and also reduce costs for brokers, real estate agents, or any advertising fees or maintenance that are associated with the transition between tenants. Next slide. In terms of how this ordinance can improve or it can help forward the city's energy goals, in-house reporting has shown that a majority of Somerville property owners do not pay for utility bills. And this, along with a hot housing market, can disincentivize rental property energy upgrades. So as mentioned on previous slides, improving the knowledge and awareness of energy efficiency can improve the understanding of buildings and how they operate, along with the incentives that are available to improve them. And that is particularly important for low-income households, which are 3 times as energy burdened as non-low-income households. And what that means is that even though they might be using the same amount of energy, they're paying a disproportionate cost due to a lack of efficiency of the unit. So, some studies have suggested that energy is a necessity, and what that means is that at a certain point, we can't use less without severe consequences, but yet it still costs more for inefficient households to operate. Next slide. So this ordinance also supports climate goals. The ordinance helps reduce the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in Somerville, which are buildings, and most of that, a large portion of that comes from rental units. Next slide, please. This ordinance also seeks to gather baseline information to inform policy decisions and target incentive programs too. So it will help the city understand challenges with current programs and adapt accordingly, increase awareness of available resources, understand if and how interventions are working, and inform decision-making. One example of how this engagement effort has already helped is that OSC recently hired an energy advisor and has already started implementing energy advisor office hours hosted by the Council on Aging. We've had 2 sessions so far, and we're excited to continue that. Next slide. Our our priorities for ordinance implementation are to minimize and mitigate potential risk of displacement, address risks to naturally occurring affordable housing, maintain and improve the viability of living in Somerville for long-term residents, manage the economic burden and impact to small-scale landlords and tenants, and ensure frequently used policy tools such as the rental registry and energy disclosure tools are tailored to work for Somerville. Next slide, please. So how did we get here? Well, it's been a really long journey. In 2017, a community process took place where working groups discussed what to include in the city's first climate action plan called Climate Forward. The buildings working group recommended a rental licensing program with energy efficiency standards as a high impact strategy with the potential to reduce the city's emissions by nearly 20% by 2050 while addressing health and housing priorities at the same time. After years of research, staff determined that it was prudent for the first proposal related to this to be only a rental registry and energy disclosure program to both increase awareness and education, learn about the community, and build foundational systems, and then consider the other aspects of that strategy later in the future. In 2021, a draft ordinance was submitted to City Council, and at the time we explained that the draft was intended to be informed by focus groups and we were actively seeking funding. We were awarded that funding in late 2023 and focus groups and interviews began earlier this year. Next slide, please. The program relies on two documents, the ordinance, which is a draft of it is posted to our website currently. The ordinance itself would authorize the city to implement this program. It has some key components like the purpose, registration, the disclosure, and it sort of explains kind of the key components of it. It includes exemptions and exceptions, penalties, reporting requirements, as well as effective dates. And then that second document is called we're calling it the program manual. The drafting of this document would begin if the ordinance is approved by City Council. The program manual would include instructions for implementation, and it would be informed by another public engagement session. And it would detail what types of things like what types of data disclosures to be required, what types of platforms would be used, and be informed by coordination amongst city departments. And it would be intended to be a living document to be informed by changes in the community, the program, and our needs and technology changes over time. And before I turn it back over to CBI to discuss findings on engagement so far, I'd like to note that there will be additional opportunities for engagement on the ordinance and the program manual. So Toby.
Great. Thank you, Christine. So we are going to go ahead and open it up for clarifying questions. You can see on your screen there again the instructions for how to raise your hand in Zoom. We'll then call on folks and give you a chance to ask your question. I want to really ask that folks please make these questions, right? We're going to give you just 1 minute, right, which is really enough time to ask a question, but not make a comment. We know that. And the reason for this is we're going to go into breakout conversations where folks will have much more of an opportunity to really share your reactions, your perspectives, and we'll be gathering sort of the feedback component during those sessions. So we want to again encourage folks to please ask a question. We'll have a chance for a couple of these before we move on and share a little bit about our findings. So I'm going to have a little timer that appears that shows sort of a 1 minute countdown. It might be pretty small, but we'll see when it goes off and we'll ask folks to wrap up their question when that happens. So I see a couple of hands coming up already. Fantastic. So we're going to start with Sam Geckner. Okay. So you should be allowed to speak now. Go ahead, Sam. What's your question?
Thanks. So two quick questions. One is I just searched the city site. I can't find the draft documents. So if you guys could share those in the chat, that would be really great so that we can take a look at those. And related to that, you mentioned a program in Maine. I just Googled that really quickly, and it looks like that was something that was done at the state legislature level. And so they allowed tenants to go directly to suppliers to get the data. I wonder how that part's going to work here, Toby. I remember talking to you about that in the focus groups. So I'm curious to hear about how that problem of how we get the data is going to be handled in this. Thanks.
Great. Thanks so much, Sam. Christine, do you want to take those questions on? Yeah.
Sure, thank you. Yes, thank you, Sam. So briefly, I think that question is something that would be answered in the development of the program manual. So I think we've been doing some research as a result of some of the comments that we've heard through the focus groups to start figuring out what that might look like and what our limitations are, what some of the challenges might be. But ultimately, it would not be determined until we do additional engagement with the community and with Eversource and once the actual ordinance itself is passed. But some options that we are looking at would involve Eversource, and then I think what you might see in the ordinance that's posted online is that there might be a distinction between different sizes of buildings and what information would be required in them based on the current kind of landscape of what's available from the utilities.
Great. Thanks, Christine. And just to draw people's attention to the chat, the link has been posted in there to the proposed ordinance. Okay, thank you. So Julia's iPad, you are next. I assume your first name is Julia. So please go ahead. You should be allowed to speak.
In the proposed ordinance, it indicated that the landlord would be responsible for the registry costs and also completing the template. Is the city likely to create the template or offer a template for the landlords to complete the information themselves? And what type of pricing are they looking at that the landlords would be responsible for?
Thanks.
Sure.
Christine, yeah. The
Thank
question
you.
on the template and the pricing. Yep.
Yeah, pricing, sorry, just to clarify, it's pricing for the actual registering the units, is that right? Okay. Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Julie.
Yes, that was my question, is what type of cost the landlords might have to assume for registering their unit.
Sure. Thank you. So the only costs that would be incurred would be administrative costs. So the cost of the city to run the program. And those would be determined in the course of creating the program manual as well. But we for what it's worth, we are cognizant of the comments that we've heard through the focus groups where, you know, we've heard that there are concerns around costs, so we will definitely take those into consideration.
Mm-hmm. And I believe there's also a question about sort of the template, right? Is that something else that is going to be designed in the manual, or is there more you can share about that?
Yes. So the template, we would need to select the format. I imagine that there would be an online component in line with feedback that we've heard about making it easy and accessible for landlords, especially and property owners of multifamily units that are larger too. So I imagine that there would be an online component, and then there would also be an in-print component too, and city staff would be able to assist with completing either of those versions.
Great, thanks, Christine. Okay, Frank P, go ahead.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you. Go ahead.
So I'm not as techy as a lot of the younger folks, but thank you. I think I'm following up on Julie's question about template. The definition part of the proposed ordinance says form prescribed by the city which reflects information related to usage, features, and efficiency in the rental unit. And I read a lot of the comments on the 44-page feedback that you guys put together. What is the information that you contemplate at this juncture of requiring us to put in there? I think the only thing that landlords may be able to, and this I'm trying to clarify this, is the type of energy or heating system that, say, the heating of the apartment would be, or perhaps the type of system that the stove might use. I'm not sure what else a landlord might be able to provide. So if you could clarify, what is the actually energy looking for or contemplating looking for?
Great.
Thank-
Thanks, Frank.
Yeah, thank you, Frank. Yeah, I think and Toby will get into this, I think, when we start to go through the feedback that we've heard from folks, but in the focus groups, I think there was an interest in learning a little bit more about energy features, and some folks were also interested in cost and usage of a particular unit. And I think there's pros and cons to, both of those. I think, the pros, of course, with energy features would be, it would give the city, it would, help us to help motivate us to like help increase the knowledge base of what those energy efficiency means are and how they impact, energy efficiency in a unit, comfort, things like that. And across property owners and for renters too. And then, in terms of cost, it might not just providing cost alone, I think, might be the thing that's most accessible for people, but it doesn't quite tell the whole story about like behavioral, usage of a particular unit. So I think we want to kind of weigh those options as we're looking at what information we'd provide. I think the feasibility question is definitely a good one, and that's also one that we're talking about with Eversource and other folks to see what's possible for a program like this.
Great. Thanks, Christine. Let's keep going. Amanda, go ahead. You're up.
Hi, thanks very much. I think I have a question that's a variation on the theme here. In other cities and states where these registries exist, what is the typical frequency with which landlords have to report data? What are the typical data that need to be reported, and what are sort of a typical range of costs, say, per unit for landlords to be registering?
Great. Thanks, Amanda. Yeah, Christine, what can we share about kind of
Sure.
what we know is typical? Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. I think it really kind of depends. It's a pretty wide range, and a lot of the programs are also wrapped up into inspection programs. So you get prices that are a little bit higher because it does also include an inspection component. So, but for example, typically registration happens annually, or it's sort of like renewing a registration, and then you would get other components, like an inspection happening, or energy standards happening, usually not annually. Some places do annually, but usually it kind of oscillates between every like 5 and 10 years, depending on like the size of the city and, budget and workforce and number of units, all kinds of things. So, so I think it definitely depends. And it would be difficult to break out the registry piece and the disclosure piece, I think, from those. But the cost range can be, maybe anywhere from yeah, I think I've seen maybe as low, I'm trying to remember, this is a couple of years ago now, but maybe as low as, I want to say maybe like $20 a year, and then but it can go up to and it depends on if there's like what else is kind of added on to that too, if there's inspection costs or everything else. So I think it just really depends. I think what we're talking about here tonight is just only the registry piece and only the disclosure piece, so it won't quite look like programs that have this in other cities that also have those bigger components that are much more involved and more expensive.
Mhm. And Christine, there was one other little piece of the question around typical data that's collected.
Oh,
Is that
yes.
something we can share?
Sorry. Yeah, typical data. For the registry piece, property owner information, local point of contact. So somebody that's living within a certain, kind of radius of the city that a city might be able to contact. That basic contact information. And some cities ask, when their last heating system safety check was completed in the unit, just for example. Yeah, I think that those are probably some two good examples of other the kind of data that people are using in other cities.
Okay, great. Thanks, Christine. All right, I think we have, a couple more minutes for maybe one or two more questions, then I think we'll go to the CBI presentation, but there will be another opportunity for questions after that, right? In addition to the small group conversations. And you also see on the screen there an opportunity to send in email questions, and we'll try to address as many of these as we can tonight. So let me see, I saw a hand go down. The top of the queue now is Fanny Harrison. So go ahead, Fanny.
Hi, everyone, and thank you very much for this initiative and also the opportunity to provide feedback. What I'm a little bit disappointed on the fact that you want feedback on an ordinance while the actual content of the energy disclosure form is not, I don't feel it's quite set yet. And I think it's actually an important piece because if we need as a landlord to provide data about cost, for one, I'm not sure it reflects well on what the actual energy efficiency of the building might be, because it's subjected to also different level of comfort that people might want to have where they live.
Great, thanks, Fanny. So, Christine, I can, if it's helpful, respond a little bit on to one thing we did here in our community outreach is exactly the point you just made, Fanny. That is not necessarily the usage, the cost, right, depends on a lot of factors, right, in addition to the energy features of the unit, right? So that's the thing that we've definitely heard. But I think another embedded question, and you correct me if I'm wrong, is will there be more opportunities, or what opportunities will there be for engagement when the city does have some more of those details of potential requirements or elements of the disclosure that are part of this, right? So I don't know if Christine, you can share a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think I think that's definitely a fair point. I think the idea with creating a living document was sort of in the spirit of the ordinance, where we want it to grow as the city grows. So as units are as information is coming in and we're learning more about our rental units and we're learning more about the needs of the community, we might be able to evolve information, and and then the same goes for technology too. As technologies change, we can have a little bit of flexibility there in terms of the types of information that we that could be asked for. In focus groups, folks might have asked for information about energy features for a house. There was weatherization. There's questions, if a house has solar, what type of heating system it has, if it has air conditioning, if there's Energy Star appliances. If there's double or triple pane windows. Some of those things might be able to help a tenant understand, how a little bit more about how the unit might operate if they were living there. In terms of and then of course I think in terms of like the usage and the cost question, that would be something that we would have to determine if it was feasible with Eversource. Of course, I think a couple folks also brought up the idea of energy scores, and at least our understanding now is that the current landscape for scores systems may not necessarily map onto Somerville's housing stock as cleanly as it would for a city like Portland, Oregon, where they have like newer builds, lots of single family buildings, lots of duplexes. And those are, more expensive too. So I think we're kind of considering all of the options here and trying to right size this for what makes the most sense for Somerville and what makes the most sense for the first iteration of a program like this. And how do we gradually do this in a way that's accessible and not confusing and helpful. It helps to address the goals that the city has and helps property owners and renters too.
Mhm. And Christine, just to add, I think you said earlier, right, that if this does pass through City Council and there's development of a program manual, that there would be additional stakeholder input on that, right, in the future, when those details are being ironed out. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. There will be lots of opportunity for stakeholder feedback before when this goes to City Council, and if it gets passed, then before definitely. We will want to have extensive stakeholder and community engagement as we develop the program manual. And we have been working with our colleagues across multiple departments, including the housing division, for the past several years on researching this and figuring out what this might look like and how it might impact the folks that they work with too. So, so we would definitely consult with them too.
Great. Thanks so much, Christine. So I still see, a couple of hands up in the queue. We're gonna press forward to the next portion of the meeting, but you can go ahead and email your questions if you want to the city. And we'll also have another quick opportunity for Q&A after the CBI presentation in just a few minutes. Okay, so we want to offer some brief background on the stakeholder engagement process that we, CBI, we're moving forward with on behalf of the city. And just to clarify what this was all about, right? The city asked CBI as a third party to try to get as broad and as valuable stakeholder feedback we could from a range of different perspectives and subsectors across the city as they consider whether or how to move forward with this proposed ordinance. So can we clarify those stakeholder perspectives, make sure that if this moves forward, it incorporates those as much as possible, right? And gives the city that important landscape understanding of what people are thinking as they decide whether or how to move forward with this. So in terms of what we did, beginning in April of this year, we started doing some interviews. We spoke with folks who are pretty deeply involved in Somerville's various housing subsectors, from tenant representatives to landlord representatives, to affordable housing advocates, to low-income advocates, to climate advocates, trying to get a sense of what the range of perspectives are on this ordinance, and to really help us in the design of the next stage, which were our focus group conversations. So who should we be speaking to? What kinds of questions should we be asking when we open this up to community members? So we did as much outreach as we could reasonably get to try to welcome people in who were interested to be in those focus groups. And we ended up having 10 of them, plus a couple of supplemental interviews to try to kind of make sure we were getting all the subsectors that we heard were important. We ended up having 4 tenant focus groups, 4 landlord focus groups, a focus group focused on representatives from climate organizations, and we did some outreach to make sure we got enough representatives from professional services organizations as well. We used partners to help with outreach, to help with convening, to try to really cast a broad net. We also offered gift cards to folks who were not being paid by their organizations to be in these focus groups to try to make them accessible for folks from all different socioeconomic backgrounds. All of what we heard, right, we've been compiling into a summary document that you heard one of our questioners in the meeting reference that is available online. We're going to add to that document a summary of what we hear tonight to make it as comprehensive as possible. And of course, that will be considered by the administration and by City Council as they decide whether or how to move forward with the proposed ordinance. In terms of what we heard, right, first of all, a lot, right, we spoke with more than 80 people, but we want to just give you some of the high level headlines. And I just want to be clear, what I'm sharing on this slide and in the next handful of slides are stakeholder perspectives. These are not facts, these are not city perspectives, these are not CBI recommendations, these are just things that people heard, that people said, that we heard. So by and large, overall, at a very high level, the majority of people with whom we spoke had a positive response to the idea of the RED, the Rental Registry and Energy Disclosure Ordinance. People suggested that this could be a meaningful and helpful way to advance the city's climate goals, and generally that having more transparency in the rental market to help tenants with decision-making seems like a good thing, right? It seems helpful to empower people with that kind of information. And a registry could also help the city with tracking buildings, ownership patterns, et cetera. We also heard some concerns around the details of implementation, around impacts on the housing market, and around the administrative burden that the program might place on the city, right? And of course, on building owners. In terms of tenant perspectives, we heard some hopes and some concerns. We heard hopes around transparency, right, around introducing more accountability to landlords, and also hope that this would be a way for the city really to be a leader in the Commonwealth on how do we advance climate goals. We also heard hopes that whatever system comes out of this is very accessible and easy to use for tenants, and then maybe some concerns about how do we ensure reliability of this. The city really should be paying attention to that, we heard. Or how do we ensure that we're actually having the climate impacts that we want? This program seems helpful, but in and of itself, we heard really across focus groups that this is not the silver bullet that's going to get us there. It might be additive, but it needs to be part of a broader package. When we spoke to landlords and realtors, I think we heard many similar perspectives among those two stakeholder groups. And we also heard some hopes and concerns. We heard among some landlords hopes that this could really be an opportunity to showcase their properties, right? If they feel like they're really doing a good job and implementing some energy measures. They also expressed hope that however this is designed, it's really streamlined for them. But I would say among landlords, we really heard a range of opinions, everywhere from cautious optimism and support to real significant concerns, right? Some of the landlords we spoke with really had some significant, meaningful opposition to what this could mean. So the main concerns we heard were around the administrative burden and a sense that the city has been adding burdens to landlords and that this is an additional step that sort of is part of a broader pattern that is making it hard to be a landlord in the city. Also concerns around introducing friction to an already really constrained housing market, and concerns around how is our data going to be handled? Is it going to be secure? How is the city going to deal with privacy concerns? When it came to this question around the impact of this ordinance, right? What is it going to actually do in terms of climate goals? One of the big pieces of feedback we heard, and I referenced this earlier, is that for this to be meaningful, it can't be the thing that the city hopes is going to make the difference, right? It can be part of a broader package that could actually make other things more effective, but in and of itself, transparency is great, but it's not going to help us it's not going to fully get us to our climate goals. So maybe we think about using this as a way to improve incentive programs, raising more awareness of them, targeting them more effectively. Maybe it's leading to the development of some kind of energy standards moving forward and enabling that. And then we also heard advice on things the city should really focus on. Things from the affordability impacts that we've been referencing, language justice, different access needs that people might have, and really doing a strong job raising awareness. So I'm going to just briefly spend a couple more minutes here going through some of the specific topics that we went over in these focus groups that we got input on. And I'm just going to say, I'm going to be doing this very quickly. If there are follow-on questions, we'll have a chance to address those. But I just want to give a quick sense of what we heard on these different topics that came up. And you can see the list there on your screen. And I'm going to go through these one by one. So this question that has come up a bunch already in this conversation is, what are the information disclosure pieces of this going to look like? What are landlords going to be asked to provide? And we heard from tenants and broadly, and climate advocates and researchers and others, a lot of interest in transparent data, broadly speaking. Things like expected energy costs or past energy costs, things like a history of complaints, things like appliance types and efficiency, right? Ventilation or air quality issues, a whole range of things came out. But we also heard from landlords and property managers suggestions that we really need to be thoughtful and cautious. We can't expect landlords to provide everything about their unit if we don't want to overly burden them. So some data might be available elsewhere, or maybe it's just very hard to obtain, verify, and keep updated. So the city has to be thoughtful and pay attention to what's actually feasible. And then we also heard questions around the use of cost data from utilities. So what are the actual utility bills? That data is the tenants' data, right? They have the sort of private ownership of that data. So to ask landlords to provide that to the city, folks were suggesting that's something you really got to think hard about. That could be challenging or problematic, right? So some real cautions around asking landlords to be required in some way to obtain that from tenants. On the registration system, we also heard feedback. So what is the system that landlords have to go into to provide this information? And we heard, generally speaking, that the city needs to be paying attention to the range of landlords in the city that are going to have very different needs in terms of how this registration system is going to work. And they should pay attention to them and make sure it's going to work for all those different types. So for large landlords, for example, can we have bulk data submission? Can we automatically import data that already exists elsewhere? Can we have an early registration option? And then for landlords, maybe who are smaller landlords or less tech savvy, things like a non-online option, right? And you can see other really important considerations like ADA accessibility or translatable that came up and people were noting as super important. On this issue of, so another issue we talked about was, how do we raise awareness? What should the city be doing to raise awareness? And also, how do they make the system that tenants are accessing to find this data or others are accessing to find the data that landlords have provided as accessible as possible? And we got a lot of really helpful information and suggestions on this, really encouraging the city to do this the right way, to make it professional, easy to use, human-centered design, provide lots of education around what the data means within the system. And then likewise, information on landlords on where to get incentives for opportunities for them to improve their units. Right. And also suggestions that, an online system is great, and maybe that's the main source of the data, but you could also do things like include this in the lease packet or provide physical notices on buildings. On the question of housing costs, we got a lot of feedback on how to think about minimizing impacts on that. And generally, the feedback we got related not so much to the RED ordinance itself, but sort of what else is the city doing? So suggestions that the city really needs to be thinking hard about incentives and making sure that landlords are getting the right incentives to defray costs if they're being asked to make upgrades, or if those upgrades are being made more transparent. Maybe the city thinks about conditioning those incentives in some ways, right? If you receive something, maybe there's limits on what you can do with your rent in some number of years after that. Suggestions that the city should be thinking about rent stabilization, and suggestions that the city should be thinking about maybe this is a pilot, right? To see how it goes and then expand it moving forward. On the issue of rolling out the program, a lot of different feedback. Some people really emphasizing the urgency of that, and others emphasize rolling it out quickly. Others emphasizing that we really need to make sure you get this right? Make sure it's an effective design and a smooth launch. Take the time to do it the right way, even as we try to move forward as quickly as we can. We heard things like having a flexible design so it can improve over time, and really different opinions on how long should it be until actually kind of enforcement begins. What's the compliance timeline? We heard very different perspectives on that. Just a couple more here. We heard some suggestions on enforcement. And generally speaking, this was pretty consistent. We heard across focus groups that it's not a really good idea to rely on tenants to enforce this. There are power dynamics, there are power issues that make that just not the right approach. At the same time, there's very limited capacity within city agencies, within ISD, to do this. So this is a challenge, right? The city needs to think carefully about how we're going to ensure accurate disclosures. And maybe we think about measures like a sliding scale for different kinds of landlords, different sizes of landlords, or different numbers of infractions, if there's some kind of penalty associated with the program. On the question of connecting this to incentive programs, so this came up, people really strongly recommending that for this to be useful, it should be connected to things like Mass Save, right, and other incentive programs. So generally, you could use this to really improve outreach to landlords. You could use it to showcase landlords that are doing a great job and maybe do additional outreach to those who have opportunities for improvement. And then finally, we heard some suggestions around exemptions, and these really varied, right? So people suggesting that some landlord types could be exempt. For example, if for whatever reason the tenant is paying utilities, or if you're a small landlord in an owner-occupied unit in the same building as renters, maybe you should be exempt, right? Just a suggestion that these are kind of different situations, right, that maybe don't have exactly the same rationale for disclosures, right? If tenants are not being asked to pay, they don't have the same interest in knowing some of this information. But then we also heard really strongly opposed perspectives on that, that fairness across landlords is really important, and that even tenants who aren't paying for utilities might have an interest in this data. So we should apply it more broadly. So different perspectives on this question. Okay, so that is a very quick run through of the summary of the ideas we heard, the various perspectives. We want to again open it up to questions. We have a couple minutes now for this before we send you to breakouts. And yeah, let's open it up. So same guidelines as before. You can raise your hand and we will call on folks and give you an opportunity to ask a clarifying question. Great, so thank you. I see Phil's hand. Go ahead, Phil. Let me give you a chance to speak. Phil, you can go ahead and voice your question. You might need to unmute. We can't hear you. All right, let's maybe give Phil another chance in a minute. But for now, we're going to go to Alan H. Okay, so Phil, see if you can work out your audio, and we'll come back to you in just a minute. Alan H, go ahead. Yeah, I'm not hearing anything. Our other panel, no, we're not hearing anything. Okay, I think you guys are on mute, so you might need to unmute. Alan H, can you unmute? Okay. We're going to go to Ramon Bueno. Okay, unmute, and you can go ahead and ask a question.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, earlier in the presentation, it was said that 60% of the cities have implemented things like this. And in relation to these last points that were looked at, the concerns about how the incentives of all this new data will impact the rental market in terms of displacement and gentrification on the one hand, but also in terms of maybe polarizing the landlord market in terms of the ones that don't have the resources to do a whole lot about the units they have, except maybe very incrementally, and then in a market that's sort of responding to quality and then rents going up.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious if there's much data or coordination between cities that have implemented this to gather what their best lessons learned have been to manage that.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks. I think that's a question for you, Christine.
Sure.
Appreciate
Thanks.
it.
Yeah, thanks, Ramon. So, yeah, the city, a couple years back, we received a grant to do what's called a peer learning exchange with cities from Seattle to Somerville and including Ann Arbor and Dearborn, Michigan, and it gathered a lot of cities that were that had they of course have larger populations than Somerville, but we're really similar in terms of the housing market, and their rental populations. And we spoke with them and other cities. I think Columbia, Missouri was another one. And they all have a lot of the longstanding programs that have been around for around 50 years have compliance rates around 90 to 100%. And we were able to gather best practices from them over a conference, a day-long conference, and get lots of lessons learned, and have really taken that into our program design and our approach to engagement as well. So yeah, we've have a long, a lot of folks that we can learn from and learn best practices from to make this work for Somerville.
Great.
Great, thanks, Christine. I think Alan H., you might have successfully gotten yourself unmuted. We'll give you another chance. Go ahead if you're there.
Hey, thanks. I hope this is working this time. Pull me
We
in.
got you. Yep.
All right. After doing this for 40 years, being a property manager and landlord, I've noticed that everybody lives different. Some people keep the thermostat at 60 degrees in the winter, and I've seen it as high as 84 degrees in the winter. How are you going to differentiate that in your numbers?
Yeah. Thanks,
Yeah.
Alan.
Yeah,
Christina, response on that. Yeah.
thanks. Yeah, thank you, Alan. I think that is I think that's a similar question with what was asked previously. So I might kind of repeat myself, but I think there's two sort of kind of sides of the coin that we're interested in for energy data. And one side you have like the usage and the cost, and then on the other side you have the features. And I think there's pros and cons to both of them. With the features side of things, of course, you sort of take out that behavioral aspect, or like the quantity of people living in a unit aspect, and you're just looking at the features. The con with that is that some folks might not, that might not be the most accessible way for folks to understand if a unit is energy efficient or not, even though it may be more accurate. I think there were also some concerns with ability to get that sort of information. And then on the other side, you have the costs and the usage, and that might be the most accessible, I think, on its face to folks. But to your point, then you have that sort of that caveat that everybody uses energy differently, and it might not give people the most accurate picture of how energy efficient a unit is. So I think the answer might be sort of a hybrid solution, but I think we're still in search of the perfect way to do this, the best way to do this for Somerville. So I'm hoping that in the breakouts tonight, if folks have, would be happy to hear from folks if anybody has any other ideas on what they would like to see. And we can definitely take all of that into consideration once we begin developing the program manual.
Great, thanks, Christina. I want to just do one more question and a brief answer. Then I think I'm gonna hand it over to Abby to set us up for breakouts. So, Phil, I see your hand. Are you able to now unmute? I'm gonna give you a quick opportunity here. If not, I'm gonna go to the next person. Go ahead, yeah, Phil.
Can you hear me now?
Correct. Yeah, we can.
Okay,
Go
great.
ahead.
Sorry about the audio issues before. Thanks for putting this together. My question is around how this decision actually ends up getting made. Like, is this something that's voted on as to whether this ordinance moves forward, or how does that work?
Great.
Yes, yeah, thank you, Phil. Yes, so we will discuss that later in the as part of the next steps, but we are going to be we'll have this meeting tonight. We will discuss with our interdepartmental working group internally about the feedback, and then our plan is to submit a proposed ordinance to City Council, and then City Council would likely refer it to the Legislative Matters Committee, who would schedule a meeting to discuss, and then they would report out to the full council on their recommendations for whether or not to approve it, or not, or discuss further. And then the council would likely take a vote that would determine whether or not it gets passed eventually.
Great, thanks, Christine. So those of you who still have more questions, please do send them via email, but we really want to make sure we have an opportunity to hear from as many of you as possible and get your perspectives. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Abby, who's going to explain to you how exactly we're going to handle these breakout conversations. So Abby, over to you.
Great, thanks, Toby. Hi, everyone. Thanks again for joining. So for the rest of the evening here, we're going to go into breakout rooms for discussion, and we're hoping really to have a chance to hear from all of you that have taken your time tonight. And we're looking to hear with what you heard in the summary of feedback. Was there anything that resonated for you, anything that you had questions about, or that you think was missing in that summary? Any thoughts that you would want to add to it? Or if there are any other reactions to the program that you want to share with us, we'd love to hear that. We'll be taking notes during these breakouts, and we will develop an appendix to that engagement report that was referenced earlier and linked in the chat. That will include a summary of what we heard tonight, and that will go to City Council along with the draft ordinance for their deliberation. So we are proposing a few guidelines to keep in mind during the breakouts. One, there are no wrong answers. We want to hear your opinion, so we hope you'll share openly. We don't need to find consensus or agreement in these groups, but we do ask that you be respectful of everyone in conversation with you. We do really want to hear from as many of you as possible, and some of these groups might be on the slightly larger side, and we only have about 20 minutes before we come back to go through the next steps. So we ask that you be concise in your feedback and leave time for others. No more than 2 minutes per comment if possible. And if you don't get a chance to share in the group, or if you have more that you want to share, we do invite written feedback to the email that's in the chat, the osc@somervillema.gov, and anything, all the questions and comments that are shared with that email during the meeting, we will summarize those and include them in the report that goes to City Council. So the logistics. So in a minute, you will have the option to select which breakout room you want to go into. You'll see a pop-up icon on your screen once we open that. There will be a few options by sector or category. So there will be 3 landlords groups because we have the most number of landlords here tonight. There will be 1 group for tenants, and then 1 group for climate organization representatives, professional services representatives, and anyone who said other. We know that these are not necessarily mutually exclusive categories, so just pick the one that you most want to be in discussion with, or that most resonates with you. Because there are 3 landlord groups, we had to divide this in a slightly odd way. You'll see letters of the alphabet after each of the groups. And that's just if you could pick the group that matches the first letter of your first name. So for example, Larissa, the landlord, would select the landlord group that has letters F through M. Okay, and then once you're in breakouts, you'll be able to come on video. Please do, we'd love to see you. And you'll be able to unmute and mute yourselves. And if we have large groups, we'll ask that we do another raise hand to join a queue option. But if it's a smaller group, we can have it be a little more organic. And then lastly, the facilitator will ask if there's anyone who wants to do a report out at the end. And so if you're interested in sharing the 3 main themes that arose in your discussion, please volunteer. We'd love to hear from you at the end of the meeting. Okay, so again, we're looking for your feedback on what stood out to you. If there's anything that was missing, anything you have questions on, or just general reactions. So Naomi just opened the breakout room, so you should see something on the bottom of your screen, a little breakout room icon with 4 boxes, and you can.
Okay, so welcome back, everyone. All right, so we are going to just take a couple minutes now, and we really want to hear just a little bit about what came out of those breakout group conversations. So let me check in. Is anyone from the first landlord group going to be presenting?
Yes,
Abby?
I think we have Alex willing to. Alex, sorry, we did. Yeah, perfect. Hand is
Great.
up.
Let's hear from Alex. Go ahead, Alex. Just a couple of the themes that came out. You should be able to speak, Alex.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, go ahead.
Great. We had a couple concerns that kind of seemed like a general consensus coming out of our group. One is new versus old. Right now, we have a lot of brand new buildings that are being constructed. Union Square definitely comes to mind. Prospect Street. I brought up an example of Springfield Street, where there's a lot of brand new construction going down to the stud with top of the line, hopefully the most energy efficient options available to them. Then you have somebody like me who manages properties that are 100 years old. Most of them are from 1900 to 1920. I have done everything that I possibly can, just shy of gutting it down to the studs and starting from scratch. But if I do that, then that means that property comes off of the housing stock for rentals. Tenants get displaced. At the end of the day, in order to make up for those costs, I'm probably going to condo it out in order to recoup the hundreds of thousands of dollars it would take in order to attempt to reach the energy efficiency of some of these newer constructions. So if I don't end up going that route, but I do as much as I can, which I have, all of my properties are mass save energy audits from 2020 to 2023, all recently done. Am I permanently going to be stigmatized as a B quality energy efficiency versus these brand new builds that will be A for a long time? And I'll never be able to get to A unless I change the product completely. So that's one thing that we're nervous about because we're automatically going to be marked down, even though we have a different product with it being 100 years older.
Right.
Another thing kind of along the same lines, it kind of overlaps. So there are a lot of landlords out
Alex,
there that
if I could just request just to keep this concise, give us the main point. We do need to hear from some other groups and we're up against it with time.
Sure.
So, please,
there are
yeah.
a lot of landlords that are already doing the right thing. They're advertising that they're doing the right thing in order to get good tenants in. Energy efficiency, doing insulation, everything that they possibly can, and they advertise this during the process when they go out to market. So now we're paying the city of Somerville in order to also have this information, even though we're already proudly displaying it on our own. And then another issue that we quickly discussed was proximity requirements, which was something that was brought up in one of the documents, I believe, and we just had several questions about that.
Okay, great. And I know those notes were taken. Thanks so much, Alex. Really appreciate you speaking on behalf of your group. I was unable to get a volunteer in my landlord group, so I'm going to quickly offer a high-level summary from landlord group 2. I would say a couple of the themes that came up. Number one, that really folks feel like the qualitative data, at least for most of the folks in our group kind of have smaller units, it seems like more valuable than the quantitative data, unless you're having someone actually come in and sort of inspect the unit. People reported that there are really different occupant behaviors where they put the thermostat that can dramatically influence the costs. So that was something that came up. Another thing that came up was the frequency of this being really important. Looks like the draft ordinance talks about, anytime there's a change in tenant, right, doing this, having to report, whereas, that seems like a real burden, especially if you're in a large building. Like what suggestion should be, it should be, once every year or just whenever information changes, right? And then also, I think similar feedback around sort of some landlords are doing the right thing, right? Giving this information already to tenants who are interested in utility costs, for example, and they'd basically now be paying the city and adding the paperwork of the system when they're already doing it. Right? So those are some of the main themes I think we heard in the landlord focus group number 2. So let's see who is in the third landlord focus group.
Yeah,
You have a volunteer?
I'll be speaking for that.
Great, go ahead,
I don't have a
Annika.
volunteer.
I
Okay.
do just want to know where we're going to go a few minutes over. So I hope that's okay with folks, but we'll be wrapping up very shortly if you can stick around.
Yeah, we heard many of the same things that have already been spoken so far. A number of landlords saying that they're already doing this work and sharing it with tenants. Worries that variability in energy usage may skew the data, and worries about the cost to landlords. Significant emphasis on that one. But also a range of overall opinions from this is a great program. I just have a few concerns, to a few folks in our group registering a strong concern that this is the overreach of government into landlord choice and what they're already doing. Yeah, and then just also wondering whether this is already data that can be accessed in other ways rather than landlords needing to submit it.
Great, thanks, Monica. Let's go to who's going to speak on behalf of our tenant focus group.
Derek is going to speak on behalf of
Great.
the
Go
tenant
ahead,
focus
Derek.
group. And
Great.
I do
Derek.
need to, oh, go ahead. I do need to step away. So thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Christine. Right, we'll be coming out with next steps in just a minute. Thank you so much, Christine. Derek, let's hear from you. Go ahead.
Great, so I'll just stick to sort of 3 high points. I know there were other comments that won't be represented in the summary. As far as I could tell, the room was unanimously supportive of the goals, at least, of incentivizing or creating transparency into unit efficiency. We spent the largest amount of time talking about concerns that the administrative costs would be passed on to the tenants, or that landlords would lean on tenants in opposition to the ordinance if it's costly or a nuisance, or maybe just because they don't like it and they would lean on tenants. There was at least one suggestion that the city should carry the administrative costs to try to mitigate this possibility. There were questions and concerns about tenant versus landlord representation in the feedback and engagement, that it might not be proportional to the Somerville population. At least in this meeting, it seems like landlords are overrepresented despite tenants being a larger portion of the city population. Those are the major themes, so I'll stop myself there.
Great, thank you so much, Derek. All right, and last but not least, the final focus group that had a mix of climate advocates, realtors, and others. Who's going to share out for them?
Yes, I was volunteered for my breakout group.
All right,
so generally, a couple of things. Folks were positive about the ordinance itself, but also were interested in more things that focused at maybe at the state house level to incentivize energy efficient products, or dealing with the issue of if you upgrade your house, it raises the it appreciates the value of the house, raises property taxes and the like. Also, folks were very interested in the quality of the data and the kinds of the data, kinds of like age of the systems, when they would be replaced, and how that would affect climate cycle and replacement. And then also just questions about sort of the bread and butter elements of the registry and how it would deal with landlords beyond just the energy issues.
All right, okay, great. So thank you so much, Garrett. Thanks to all the presenters. Appreciate all of that. So just as a reminder, right, we were taking notes in those breakout meetings. We're going to be preparing a summary of the feedback that we heard. That'll be added to the written summary of all the engagement that we've done that is available on the Somerville website. Right, so that'll be updated to reflect what we heard in this meeting, and all of that is going to go to the administration, going to go to City Council as they consider what's next. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to Garrett to just share some final next steps on this, and then we'll thank you and wish you a good evening. So Garrett, I'll pull up my slide.
Oh,
and
thanks, Toby. Yeah.
Go ahead and share these last few pieces here.
Yeah, so we talked about this a little bit before, the legislative process and what our expectations are. So the next step would be to submit the draft ordinance or a draft ordinance to council, and then to go through that council process of going to a committee and being reviewed and revised, and then the decision on whether or not to adopt it. If it is adopted, we anticipate a significant implementation period, months long, that would have sort of regular meetings of a working group within the city to work on the program manual and the specifics of the program. And then also a series of times where we could solicit engagement from the public about those specifics. A lot of the things people were asking about today, what items in particular would be reported about buildings, those kind of things. So this is certainly not the end of the process, and we're gonna, if it is passed, then there will be a long engagement process. And so I guess we'll ask for folks to keep an eye on this space. Naomi put the Sustainaville link in the chat. That's a great place to go to read the documents that we have available now. And we're also still taking comments from folks. I'm going to put my contact information here in the chat and invite people to reach out to me. If you didn't get a chance to talk tonight, please email me or give me a call. I'm available. Got a lot of time tomorrow, and I'm working till 7:30. So if you want to get in touch with me after later in the day, that's great. Yeah, please feel free to reach out to me, and we can have a conversation, and I can take notes and reflect any comments that you have back to CBI in the report. So I think that's about it for next steps.
All right. Well, I'll just say on behalf of CBI, right, a huge thank you. I know the city, of course, we want to offer a huge thank you as well. Really appreciate you showing up and offering your feedback, and appreciate just the candor, the reflectiveness, the great questions. So appreciate it. Thank you, and we'll hope to continue hearing from you, right, as this continues. Have a great night, everyone. Garrett, I don't know if you want to say any final words.
No, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks again.
All right. Take care, everyone.